Go. And good evening, everybody. Welcome to Hoops HD, the Hoops HD Report. I'm your host, Chad Sherwood, joined by a cast of millions here tonight. We have one of our biggest panels ever. Very quickly run through everybody. We've got David Griggs off to one side of me, Matt Sikowski on the other. And the road directly beneath me in the middle, we got John Stalika on the two sides, John Titel, Joby Fortson, and joining us as well, first time in a while, our colleague Kyle Lamb. Kyle, welcome back.
I feel like this is the Price is Right panel here. Kyle Lamb, come on down. You're the next contestant on the Price is Right.
Well, one of the founders, and so a new face that's actually an old one.
Yeah, It's been a little bit out of the loop last couple seasons, but it's good to be back on finally.
Yeah.
And Kyle, one of the reasons we really wanted you on tonight as well was we have an email thread that we use where we debate various issues, and we've had a heck of a debate over the last week or so about Georgia Tech in particular, and the debate really focuses on metrics. And you and Matt are both big fans of metrics. But can you tell us a little bit about just metrics generally and how they factor into your consideration of teams?
Well, first of all, I'm sorry that I can't bring as much animation and emotion to tonight's podcast as I probably have displayed in that email thread because you guys got me a little worked up in that thread. Metrics are interesting nowadays because they've become so dominant in our society. And I mean, you can't turn on a basketball broadcast anymore without hearing about, BPI or KenPom. Obviously, these are the most well-known ones, but there's many out there. Jeff Sagarin's been around for years, and there's just so many of them. But there's really kind of two different types of metrics out there. And of course, two different types that we'll be talking about tonight. There's kind of more of a performance-based metric, and these are metrics like the RPI that are basically kind of just recording what a team has done. Who have you beaten, where have you beaten them, that sort of thing. It's just about what you've done.
All right.
And then it's more of a predictive type metric. These are usually points based, where they have high correlation with results than your current results are. And what that basically means is, if you take scoring margin, Ken Pomeroy uses points per possession and then uses the scales it to 100 possessions. But these are the types of things that are going to basically predict. So you kind of got these two different types of metrics. They kind of are used for two different things. The committee is basically saying, the real men's basketball committee is basically saying, we want to look at both of them and figure out a way to make use out of both types of metrics. And of course, the trick is trying to balancing the two. You want to be on one hand, you want to reward teams for what they've done, the wins and losses that they've had. On the other hand, you also want to build the strongest field possible. And of course, that's our last several days have come is because I put a little higher emphasis.
All right, we're having a little bit of audio problem there, Kyle. But I think we got you back. But let me ask, Matt, I know you're big on the metrics as well, and are you kind of on the side here that these more of these predictive metrics like Pomeroy and Sagarin are the way to go, are the way for the future?
Yeah, I am more, if we're looking at resumes, looking to see by the KenPom numbers, and even the one I would focus enough in because it does bring elements of both. That is the Sagarin ratings, because it has the predictor, which is basically a clone to KenPom. And it also has a different rating where I think is more performance-based. So the Sagarins are kind of a meld of the two. And so I'm a little surprised. I don't probably look at it enough, and I'm surprised that it hasn't quite come up as much as even, say, like KenPom and KPI for the committee, because it almost could be the best of both worlds.
Well, John Titel, you are our committee guessing expert. Do you look at any of these rankings really when you're guessing what the committee is going to be doing?
Not as intensely as everybody else. There's certainly merit to that because they don't exist in a vacuum and they don't exist just for the heck of it. Like, they do give you support for your argument to show which team has merit and which has had problems. But if we're talking about Georgia Tech, I like to use them as an example. You cannot tell me on January 4th when they lost at Duke 110-57 There's no way you could predict that they were going to come back in late January and beat Florida State and Notre Dame in a 72-hour span. It's simply impossible because one does not lead to the other. Georgia Tech's best player is a freshman 6'4" guard. He had 14 rebounds against the Seminoles, who are like the tallest team in the history of the sport. Metrics only take you so far. There is luck. There is crystal ball. There is stuff.
Joby, let me also bring you in here because you have a metric that we've been posting for a couple of years now on our website, we call your nitty-gritty ratings that rate your top 80 team. And I believe that this is not a predictive metric, but more of a resume-based one.
I'll be the first one to admit is definitely results-based. And one of the reasons why, it's not, I look at the inputs of what I think the committee, when they're pulling from the nitty-gritty sheet, then plug in. It's not even the rankings of how I would have them. The big joke that John Stalika will point out is the last team in my field is a team that I think whose coach should be fired because I don't think they're very good. But the fact of the matter is all of a sudden I'm going to have to look at them, because I do look at the ratings and say, okay, what am I missing here or what am I getting right here? I think they're a very good tool, like any of these are. I am a big fan, for instance, of KenPom as a rating per se. I don't necessarily like it as the starting point. I kind of like something more results-based as your starting point. It's just natural. You're going to put out a list of teams. You're going to kind of try to think of it. You're not going to have like all the resumes on a piece of paper, separate pieces of paper in front of you and go through it. You're going to have a guide. I have my own guide in the nitty-gritty ratings. Other people might, I think Matt uses, for instance, KenPom. That's not the way I go. Other people might use other things. I don't say that's wrong or right. I'm just saying I prefer a results-based component in the way, if you're trying to guess the committee, I probably would lean a little more KenPom-y if I'm doing my own. But sometimes, as John T. points out, my gosh, the resume screams in a particular direction. The one we were on the email thread chain screaming about was Georgia Tech, and I would align myself with John T.'s comments on that. And I think, Chad, you'll do a little show and tell of two teams coming up.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, let me do the show and tell right now. Let me start it at least. I'm going to pull up the screen we've been using for a while now here with the standings on it, modified this week to really highlight the two different types of ratings. And just quickly here, first of all, I didn't actually group RPI in with the resume type or the results-based in red, just because I think a lot of people agree that almost the RPI is getting almost antiquated at this point in time. But aside from that, these three ratings in red here, the KPI, that is Kevin, I'm going to mispronounce his name, though, because with a P, Pagwa, his ratings.
Kevin P.
Good
job, Chad.
Sparty.
Yes. The specifically, Mark Hollis, the committee chair this year, mentioned that KPI is a number that he looks at, which big surprise given that he's a Michigan State AD.
And can I interject on this?
Yes. I would like to point out that the committee chair uses a power ranking that's intended to predict what the committee will do.
Yes, that's exactly it. David Grigg just stole my thunder. This KPI was modeled to replicate and predict what the committee has done in the past and rank teams based on the criteria the committee uses. And now the committee itself is using this criteria to help select their field. It's just circular logic at its finest.
And also, Kevin is an assistant AD at Michigan State. Mark Hollis is the AD at Michigan State. A little homerism there too. The other second column here, SOR, that's a new stat from ESPN this year. In addition to their BPI, it's called their strength of resume or strength of results rating. That is a new one this year that is a results-based as opposed to predictive. JNG, that's Joby's nitty-gritty ratings that we just mentioned earlier.
Hey, and before anyone calls us homers, this one has been incredibly accurate by power rating standards. I mean, it does very well at predicting the field and predicting the seeds. There's a few outliers, like you can see, but if I can brag on Joby for a second, it's been pretty damn accurate.
And I might add, in ways that I would disagree with. The legendary one is obviously 2 years ago, no one else had UCLA in their field This had UCLA on the field. I don't think it was the right decision by the committee.
Well,
But
I still blame Joby for that one.
It proved the committee was making the wrong decision in advance, at least.
That's not entirely Joby's fault, because if you go back to the videos, Lee Del Vecchio was also predicting UCLA.
Yeah.
We'll blame them both. The green numbers, real quick. The Palm, that's Ken Pomeroy rating. BPI, this is the classic ESPN BPI that's been out for a couple of years now. And although they did revise the formula somewhat this year, is my understanding.
Yeah.
And the SAG is the Sagarins. And Georgia Tech here on the 7 line of the ACC is the key one here. Because we look at this. And the red ones, the resume ones, say that this is a bubble team, if not in, a 41, a 40. And Joby, you got them at a 27. You look at the predictive ratings, one of them for the BPI, it's 101. You shouldn't even be thinking about this team. So, Kyle, you want to make this argument here. Should we be thinking about Georgia Tech or no right now?
Well, this is very interesting, and for some context here, you pointing out the resume-based numbers are very interesting because you're absolutely right. In a typical year, once you remove the conference champions, to get to the 36 at-large bids, you're basically looking at a cutoff of around 45 to 47. Usually, the top 45 to 47 teams are going to get in the field after the automatic bids are removed. So this is very interesting because, as you point out, if you go strictly by a resume, profile test, these metrics that Georgia Tech have, 41, 40, and 27, they absolutely are tournament teams by that measure. But what's interesting by the predictive measures, of course, you have 71, 101, 76. I was looking at Kenneth Massey, who also has his own ratings that are pretty well known. He has a composite-based ranking of all different types of systems out there. And I think Georgia Tech is 75 in the composite ranking. But this is interesting because by all the predictive models, Georgia Tech is a good 30 spots outside the field. But by the resume models, they're squarely in the field right now. This is where our arguments obviously get a little interesting. For me, I don't want to go strictly by the predictive models to seed teams or select teams. But for me, it's when a team like Georgia Tech is that far out in all of the qualitative measurements, I have a hard time putting them in the field at this point just because they're so far out. If they're, say, 57 in some of the predictive models and, 47 is the last at-large team, for me, 10 spots, it's not really that big of a deal because that's randomness. That's just, a difference in system. You can make a lot of different rational arguments as to why they're only 10 spots out. I have a hard time with 30 spots. And for me, Georgia Tech, resume-wise, definitely is in the field, but I would have to see their predictive models come up and look like a little bit better all-around consistent team before I would feel comfortable putting them in.
Yeah, and these predictive models, my understanding of them at least, is that they are used to predict who is going to win a game. So what you're kind of saying by the BPI being 101 is that against an average team, if everybody in the country played an average team, Georgia Tech would end up being the 101st best of those teams if you played them 10,000 times in a neutral court, which is the type of analysis ESPN does in coming up with these numbers. So
yeah, at 101, I can tell you just for a little context, in in a 5-year sample, BPI specifically, the difference between the last at-large team at around 45 and 100, the difference in those 55 spots is roughly about 6 or 7 points. So that's to say that the last at-large team in the country would be about a 6-point favorite on a neutral floor against Georgia Tech based on BPI's model.
Yeah, and when I select teams and more so select than seed, I kind of go off of the resume. But one of the things I like to use the power rankings for is to determine how hard was a game to win and how much credit does a team deserve for winning it. So Georgia Tech specifically, and I realize that this is going to sound backwards, and instead of getting everyone to agree with me, I'm probably going to make everyone mad. I would give Georgia Tech a lot of credit when selecting them, but I wouldn't give a team a whole lot of credit for beating them.
Well, let me pull up a good comparison resume here. And Matt, let me bring you back in on this. I'm going to pull up Wichita State here over the Missouri Valley. This is almost the reverse here. It's a team that very few people have been saying is an at-large team right now. If you look at the resume numbers, other than the ESPN strength of record number, they're not really at-large numbers. But you look at the predictive models, and they should be a 5 seed.
Yeah, that's where I personally would want to see them in, given that quality. And then I know we necessarily should come into play, but Greg Marshall's a really good coach. I think that's unquestioned at this point. And I think this team, 19-4, whatever, like not against a real strong conference in the Valley this year, is down outside ISU. It is. I don't think there's a single other top 100 team outside of ISU, but that's it. Like I want them in. I'd want actually them go to Dayton, send them to the first four. It's like, I think you deserve a chance to get in, but maybe I'll give you an extra hurdle. And that's exactly what happened last year. They do that. They go there. They then beat Arizona and then have a pretty, I think, competitive game against Miami before running out of gas.
I mentioned it before, but I'll probably say it again. It's too late for Northern Iowa to get an at-large, but it would not shock me in the least to see them knock off either Wichita or Illinois State, or maybe both, because this is their usual disappearing and reappearing act in December and January.
Yeah. John T., what do you think about when you look at a team like Wichita State, who doesn't have the resume ratings, but these predictive analyses here say, hey, this team can beat all but 20 teams in the nation?
So you take a little deeper dive into their actual schedule in terms of who they played, where they play, who they beat, stuff like that. Back-to-back neutral site losses to Louisville and Michigan State are looking great now from back in Thanksgiving. Their only loss in December was by 17 points to an Oklahoma State team that back then was probably an average loss, is now looking like a pretty good loss. And the loss to Illinois State on the road by double digits is not great unless Illinois State wins the Valley. There's not a lot of top 70 wins on the schedule because they didn't play and beat anybody in the top 70 on the schedule. I think that kind of goes to the point about Greg Marshall being a great coach / having a great team. Who on earth, after watching Wichita the past several years, would want them on their schedule? They've proven they're giant killers. They've proven they can go undefeated in the regular season. Nobody wants to play them, and therefore nobody plays them, and therefore they don't have a lot of opportunities for quality wins.
Which
I actually disagree a little with John T. here. I think teams can, especially a named team from an under-the-radar conference, can get games. Gonzaga, et cetera, they can. There are teams out there who, hey, if a team like, let's say, Georgia Tech, but yeah, they're comparative. If Georgia Tech knows that if they play Wichita State and they get a win, it is a quality win in the eyes, most likely, of most people. And a loss isn't going to ding you, just like a loss out of conference to a Michigan would not ding you necessarily. I'm just throwing out a random Power 5 team. I think Wichita State's reached that level. Even in an eye test committee, I mean, it's silly for people to avoid Wichita State. And I don't think the people who make the schedules, at least a lot of the team schedules, are silly in that regard.
Well, you got to look at it here, too. I think that this is their schedule right up on the screen here. They were a little bit dinged by how weak some of the teams they played have been. For example, they went to Oklahoma, Final Four team last year. At Colorado State, should have been a better team. Tulsa was a tournament team last year. LSU should have been a little better than they've been. I mean,
Long Beach even was supposed to be a top 100 team.
Right.
The Beach should not have a 200 RPI either.
Right. South Carolina State had been the preseason favorite to win the MEAC. It's not much, but, they shouldn't have scheduled Southern Nazarene, but can't fault them too much on this, David, can you?
Not really. I don't. I think I kind of agree with both of them. I think that there are teams that will play Wichita State, but there's others that won't. I mean, some teams just won't play anybody on equal terms. I bet Louisville and Kentucky would never schedule them. Kansas won't schedule them. So there's a lot of teams that they'd probably like to play that won't play them. But at the same time, it's not as if nobody will.
Right. Again, because they got, I mean, yes, the LSU, Louisville, Michigan State games were part of the battle for Atlantis. But you got Oklahoma, you got Oklahoma State, you got Tulsa. I mean, these are fairly competitive teams that you were able to go out and schedule on your own.
Right.
And you haven't even mentioned
Wichita State here, but like I said, look at who Gonzaga plays outside the West. Like, for instance, I know Virginia, the homer call. Virginia had a home and home with Gonzaga. I see no reason why Virginia, if it was pursued, would not do a home and home with
Virginia probably would. If they had room for it on their schedule.
Yeah, I mean, room on the schedules, of course, but yeah.
Yeah.
Pursue it. Ask now. You probably get it for 2018.
Right.
Home and home.
Sorry, David, you had a comment?
Oh, yeah. I think another rating that's important, it's not on your screen here, is the DGRI. And I think it's something like the selection committee looks at. I know it's going to be in the room with them, and it just kind of factors in a lot of this. So that's another one that I like.
The DGRI.
Tim Miles is going to feature prominently in this one, I'm sure.
Yes, I need to get this on the. I might need to get this on the screen here.
All right. Well, I'm going to pull down the screen here. David, you're going to show us what the DGRI is. So
yes, the DGRI, and again, this is being sent to the committee. It's in the room. David Griggs ratings of awesomeness.
That's a DGRA first.
DGRA, yeah, whatever.
Of awesome.
Oh, so I can't spell. It's hard to type when you don't have any arms.
Okay. So, David, who is number one right now of the DGRAs?
The DGRA, right now, it is actually still Villanova, and then it's Kansas, and then, let's see, we got Virginia up there, and then we got Nebraska.
Okay. I don't even know where to go from there. Let's actually turn to some of the games here. We'll take a look at some of the measurements again when we go through each of the conferences. Let's turn to some of the games that happened this week. And Salika, let me start with you and Xavier. Huge game against Cincinnati this week where we thought they might finally get that big win, and what happened?
Well, what happened seemed to be a rarity for Xavier this year, in which they were out-rebounded and just got roasted as far as second chance points go. So that was a difference right there between turning a close game into a possible blowout had they been able to just rebound the ball. But then again, there was their other game 3 days later. They did out-rebound St. John's, but for some reason we are not talking about that right now.
Now, what we think we do have some updated news on Edmund Sumner, who got hurt in that game. And, John, I don't think it's good news either.
It is not good news, and Mo Watson is going to have company as far as rehabbing a torn ACL. And this is what Xavier confirmed Monday. So our best wishes go out to Sumner, his family, and his teammates during this time. And as far as Xavier – go ahead.
No, that's my next question is, what do you think this does for them going ahead the rest of the season?
Well, what it means is you're pretty much down to an 8-man rotation, and Quentin Gooden, who was probably third on the depth chart going into the season behind Miles Davis and Edmund Sumner at the point. It's a good thing he's had a couple good games lately because he was a slow starter at the beginning of the year, but he's about to have his feet thrown into the fire against Seton Hall at home and also Creighton on the road on Saturday.
All right. Matt, we had the SEC Big 12 Challenge on Saturday, which was, in terms of matchups, there was only one good one, and it was a really good one between Kansas and Kentucky. Anything that you took out of that game in terms of both teams?
I think Kentucky did not exploit their advantage inside with Adebayo enough, and now are in some trouble to where, like, at best, I think they get a 2 seed, and they may even have a 3 seed if the ACC ever takes some order, and a couple other things happen. Like, they're probably out of the discussion for a 1 seed now, whereas now Kansas is suddenly in pretty good shape to where even if their resume or, like, saying the power ratings are still in the 8 to 10 range, their resume will probably be strong enough to where they are probably on the one line as long as they do their usual win the Big 12.
Well, John T., Kansas and Kentucky were amazingly both coming off of losses into that game. As we saw last Tuesday night, for I believe the first or the second time ever, the 1, 2, and 4 teams of the nation all fell on the same evening, and just an amazing evening because you throw in there Villanova losing as well. How much do you ding all 3 of those teams for what happened this last week, especially with Kansas and Villanova both bouncing back over the weekend?
I think mild the dings to each. The Jayhawks, when you get beat by West Virginia, as a result of only making 6 of your 15 free throws, my God, West Virginia is a top 20 team, if not top 10 team, so minor ding. For Villanova losing to a very strong, very trending upward Marquette team, Wildcats just couldn't make it. a three-point shot to save their life. 6 of 34 from behind the arc. Outscored bench-wise by the Golden Eagles 38-6. A month ago, I'd say that's a bad loss, but now Marquette is showing they can beat anybody, so I think it's a minor ding. And, of course, Kentucky losing to Tennessee on the road, a terrible loss. The Vols only had 9 turnovers, another huge bench scoring advantage for the Vols, 37-4. And much like the Villanova Wildcats, the Kentucky Wildcats only made 6 threes. So small ding for each.
All right. Well, we mentioned Marquette there, Matt, and after the huge win over Villanova, they turn around and lose to Providence at home.
Yeah, that was a hangover special ed. While the three-point variance guides were helpful against Villanova, 6 of 34, Providence then went 11 for 20. And all in all, still a decent weekend. It's one. Remember when you guys were arguing in the bracket rundown of Marquette on the 6th line, I was still holding the brakes just a little. And that, I think Marquette's a solid tournament team. Decent chance they'll be wearing home whites, but it'll be more in the 7 to 8 seed range. I think because just the way Marquette is, it's going to be a little bit uneven going forward, where 5 and 4, 6 and 3 down the stretch, getting you in the field, but not probably consistent enough to be more than that.
Well, Joby, I've got to go to you on what was absolutely the game of the weekend, and I know you're probably still in recovery from it, but Virginia at Villanova, just an amazing finish.
Oh, it was. The joke Chad said on that email thread reference was, how boring, another Villanova buzzer beater. Matt alluded to it. Jenkins and Hart carried their poor shooting over into the first half of the Virginia game. And then, they kind of woke up. And Virginia, I think it had more to do with Villanova's ability to come back, because what Virginia has done from a Virginia perspective is, and I'll reference Kyle on this, the team that played Ohio State defensively is 100% different than the team that has played the last 3 games. It is very clear that the defense is back. The hedging, you can see the double teaming being that much quicker. And Villanova was affected by it dramatically. The number 1 team in the nation, in many people's eyes, was affected by it. And so I think there's hope from a Virginia perspective, especially since they were without Parentes due to foul trouble for a good portion of the game, finding a solid backup in Ty Jerome. I know Matt is a big fan of Ty Jerome, and freshman. Virginia shouldn't feel bad about this loss, but they better wake up, because they got Virginia Tech coming up on Wednesday. It never ends when you're in the heart of the ACC. Villanova, on the other hand, they just put a very nice star to where that small ding, as John T. well put, that ding was if they got a little ding on their car, they pretty much polished that out very quickly to keep their number 1 seed.
I don't think that there's that many teams that have impressed me more than Virginia did this past week, really, but particularly on Sunday. Even though they didn't win the game, it's harder to win at Villanova than it is to win any game in the NCAA tournament. If you think about it, that's not an outrageous thing to say. Villanova is probably a 1 seed. Even if you play them in the tournament, you're not playing them on their home court. They haven't lost it all this year. I think they're 57-2 in their last 59 games. And Virginia went in there and came as close to beating them as you can possibly come without actually doing it. You think there's hope? I think there's a lot of hope. I think they're going to win the ACC.
Well, Kyle, let me ask you this. The new APN coaches poll were out today, and now the number 1 team in the nation is the Gonzaga Bulldogs, the only undefeated team left. Do you think that is correct even, or even close to correct?
I got to say, it seems like every year we talk about, hey, this is Mark Few's best team he's ever had there. And, to be honest, this is the year I actually believe the hype with this team. I just think they're very, very balanced. I think they've got several scorers. They've got defenders. I don't see a weakness on this team. I'm not ready to say they're the best team in the country. But because obviously they haven't played the schedule that Villanova has. Some of the other teams in the country have certainly played a tougher schedule than Gonzaga. But I definitely think this is a 1 seed material. I think they're better than Arizona, and I know that'll get some of you riled up. But while everybody's talking about Arizona's win over UCLA and how they're playing with Triers back, I actually think this Gonzaga team is the best team in the West.
Titel, I got to give you a chance to respond.
No need. I mean,
Okay.
I'm a results guy, and on December 3rd, Arizona lost by 7. It was neutral site. There was no Alonzo Trier, so I'm not saying that Gonzaga would win if we played them again today, but they're undefeated, and they did it by beating Arizona and Florida and Iowa State. They earned it.
And Salika, you had a comment?
I was going to say, if Michigan State is Virginia's kryptonite, you know who Gonzaga is going to be sweating over on Selection Sunday, and that's Wichita State.
Let's do here. I'm going to pull the screen back up again with the standings on it. We like to take a quick look at the standings and some of the upcoming games and some of the other results in each conference, and got the ACC back up here again. And while we've already discussed Georgia Tech, there's a few other teams that had interesting weeks. And Joby, let me start with you. How about the Syracuse Orange? Pulling off a pair of wins over both Wake Forest and then Florida State this week.
Yeah, and it's Florida State. The Florida State will hurt them in terms of a 1-2 seed loss. But my God, what I said at the beginning of the year is if you're going to have 11 ACC teams in this tournament, which I think the capability of these teams you can do. The problem is you need a lot of help from the bottom. You need a lot of help from Boston College basically dropping every game. And that also includes Syracuse, because Syracuse has a long road to hoe to make this tournament. Yeah, if they have the opportunities in front of them and they're taking advantage of some of it, but they still got unlike Georgia Tech, in my opinion, they have a long, long road to hoe. They're way outside. And every win they get over a Wake, well, bye-bye, Wake, you're not in this tournament anymore. Every win over a Miami, bye-bye, Miami, you're not in this tournament until you beat North Carolina. It's so frustrating from an ACC fan's perspective to see Syracuse playing the spoiler. But, it is Boeheim. He does spoil.
And you're just seeing here now, I just gave a live update while we're on the air of the standings here to reflect the fact that Notre Dame suffered the loss tonight to Duke, also suffered the loss to Georgia Tech this week, David. Notre Dame, in a bit of a tailspin now. Actually, 3 straight losses if you include the Notre Dame loss.
A little bit.
Outside the Virginia loss.
Yeah, a little bit in the sense that they've lost 3 games, but none of them. I mean, it's the ACC is so heavy, top, in the top and the middle, that you could lose 2 or 3 or 4 and still be solidly in the field. So I don't know if it's a tailspin. It's definitely a setback, though.
Guys, we used to do our, Hoops HG bracketology podcast when Galen Clavio was our host, and we were, we used to do that post-game press conference theater. Has anybody done a live look-in on post-game reactions of Lee Del Vecchio when Syracuse wins games like this?
We need to get Lee back on for a little Syracuse discussion at some point, definitely. But Matt, one other team I think we've got to bring up is Miami, who huge win over North Carolina. And does that save their season?
I think it does, because their resume was way lacking before that, and now they have nothing else. Have a big win that, hey, come bubble time, I think a win like that could be a differentiator in that, like, some of these teams probably aren't going to have a win of North Carolina's quality, even home court. And so that's what I think that may have leapfrogged them into the field as we speak.
Well, Joby, I want to turn over to actually, you know what? Let me go back to the ACC here for one other second here before we get there. To actually take a look at some of these upcoming games here. And David, since I heard you speaking there, is there anything? What's the key game that you're looking forward to here the next week in this schedule here in the ACC?
Notre Dame at North Carolina is pretty big, and Louisville at Virginia, the rematch. Virginia just really seems to have Louisville's number. North Carolina ran into kind of a buzzsaw. They were a team that we actually had up on our one line when we did the Hoops HD report. And I guess, I don't know, something happened in this game in relation to the ACC Big 12 or the SEC Big 12 Challenge that I think affected it. I think I have the video of it here. Roy Williams, current coach at North Carolina, was the former coach at Kansas, and he became aware that Kansas and Missouri were not playing in the SEC Big 12 Challenge, and he had a little bit of an outburst on the sideline upon hearing that news. And I think it just affected North Carolina for the rest of the game. It was a huge distraction, and they were just out of it against Miami ever since.
Okay. I'm just going to move on here. Joby, let me go over to the Big East, where another team that had a big week here that we haven't been discussing for a long time is one of your favorite teams. And they're right in your ratings there. We could see them ranked at 48th right now, which would be right on the cusp of the tournament bid. Georgetown Hoyas with wins over both Creighton and at Butler this week.
Oh, God. It's well documented. You deserve to bring the knives out. They are 12-10. They better do better than, unlike, I've argued Georgia Tech, I think they can go 500 against what is going to be a tough schedule in the ACC and probably make it in because they'll get some good wins. Georgetown, because their mirror record's 12-10, they are not Georgia, that 16-14 Georgia team. They've got to do more than that. They got to go above 500. But the wins this week, and in particular, I think Creighton. We talk about the Watson injury. I think that fell into it. It was in the Verizon Center. Hey, that was not a shocking result. The margin was shocking, but the result itself wasn't. At Butler, if you look at Butler's resume, and this is one of the criteria I really love. Butler has beaten more teams that are in our field and the average field than anybody else. Butler has a sterling resume, except for 2 really bad losses. But beating Butler is just, and the way they did it, is this a turn the tide? Is this a 2-game blip? We'll see. I actually think it is a 2-game blip, but it's a hell of a 2-game blip when you include that great Butler.
Well, Kyle, let me bring you back in here on this because I'm going to pull Butler's resume up here right now. And all those great wins that Joby just mentioned there, Villanova, Xavier, Cincinnati, Arizona, and even down to the top 100. I can't even count how many there are. But then you got 2 horrible losses at St. John's and at Indiana State on the bottom there. And it's another team that there's a fairly big difference here between their resume and their predictive numbers. Again, I mean, clearly a tournament team, but in terms of seeding, what do you do with a team like that?
Yeah, that's one of those. That's a tough call. I saw something interesting on Twitter last week where somebody was suggesting, they were discussing the conference the NCAA had on the stats, and somebody was talking about, maybe you should make a selection based more on merit and what have you done, and the seeding based on quality. And I kind of think that's kind of something that probably you would do with Butler is that. You definitely reward them for, you definitely reward them from the litany of wins that they have. Like, Joby is absolutely correct. I mean, their profile is absolutely stunning to look at. I mean, if you just look at the wins and losses at the top, I mean, you kind of do stargazing for a while because it's like this is like a 1-seed resume when you just like look at the number of wins that they've had. But I also think you have to look, with them the quality. And I mean, you can kind of excuse them for a couple of the losses because of all the wins, but I kind of think they're a team you look at, what have they done? What are they strength-wise? And you get in the field based on the resume. You probably give them an extra couple lines because of their wins. But I also think you have to just look, what do you think this team is? And, I'm not sure they're as good as their resume, but, man, I mean, they do have an impressive resume.
And coming up this week, Titel, both teams that have suffered with injuries here, Creighton and Xavier, first of all, they got tough tests coming up Tuesday night, Creighton at Butler, Seton Hall, Xavier. Then the big game this weekend where they play each other. Is that the key for the Big East this week in those games?
It's not just those games. It's Creighton in general. Like, they were 18-1, I believe, with Mo Watson. They looked like the best team in the Big East outside of Villanova. And then it's all starting to fall apart. Granted, losses home to Marquette and at Georgetown are now looking respectable. And, of course, they beat DePaul because I think 5 of us could beat DePaul. But Butler and Xavier is very tough, and they're just – I don't want to ruin Stalika's night, but, like, this is what your team is going to look like. When you lose a top-notch point guard, it all goes downhill fast.
Sorry, Matt, you have a comment first?
I'll say this. Look at here. Seton Hall at Xavier, Seton Hall at Georgetown. I think this is a massive week for the Hall that has almost been maybe riding by on some of their good non-conference work. Well, this week you get Xavier, their first game without their point guard. And I think with how good it's been playing, they're a little more prepared than, say, Creighton was without Watson. But big opportunity because I don't think Xavier as a team was nearly as good as Creighton when they're all whole. And then at Georgetown, well, it's one of those that might be not be a winning game. This might be one of those loser is probably toast. The winner might be on the road to a berth.
Even last year, these were the two trickiest matchups for Xavier outside of Villanova. Let's not forget Seton Hall actually beat the Muskies 2 out of 3 times last year, and Creighton and Xavier had the split last year. But Xavier's going to be hard-pressed to get that split this year.
Oh, man.
Let's go over to the Big Ten. And David, let me start with the Indiana Hoosiers, who suffered another injury, yet another one. Blackman out indefinitely now for them. 0-2 this week, losses to Northwestern and to Michigan, getting blown out by the Wolverines. Is that it? I mean, time to fire Tom Crean and let's just move on to next year?
Well, that's what
Indiana fans say, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I would have suggested. Indiana fans suggest firing whoever the coach is whenever they lose to anybody, but rough week. And again, Indiana is just across the gamut. Like, we saw them beat Kansas, who might end up being the overall number 1, the first game of the year. And we've seen them get blown to bits by Michigan and Northwestern this week. They're kind of scattershot, their rankings. I mean, you want to talk about predictors better than the overall resume. A lot of that's due to a very weak out-of-conference schedule that we've discussed ad nauseum already. But I don't know. I still think they're going to land inside the bubble, but I don't think they're going to go far. They're just very, very beatable. And
Kyle, you had a comment?
We gotta talk about these signs that the Indiana bench was holding up in this game, right? Did you guys see reference to this? The coaching staff was actually holding up signs like call out screens, communicate, just like elementary stuff. I mean, it was just absolutely hilarious how far the Indiana defense has sunk that they have to hold up signs on the bench that say call out screens. I mean, this was just comedy gold.
It was great.
Matt, let me bring you in here on this Maryland team. And here's another team with a big difference in the ratings between those red ratings and the green ones that we see on the screen there. And it's kind of something I've been saying all along this Maryland team. This is one where I almost agree with these ratings because I never thought they looked like a great team, but here they are 7-1 and 19-2.
That, man, I think they've been lucky in close games. And then it just, I don't know, it seems like they sometimes drag their opponent down with them. But, hey, I remember even, not to their extent, but a few weeks ago, Notre Dame, I think we're 6-1 in the ACC. And then we're playing a little above their heads, and today we're talking 6-4, and they'll probably be after this weekend 6-5. So this Maryland 7-1 now, the Big Ten isn't as good as the ACC, but it's still good enough that at some point I think Maryland might find their level, and that 7-1 start might be, say, an 11-7 finish.
One of the two I want to bring up here, two other teams I want to bring up. But first of all, Purdue and Joby. Purdue with a loss to Nebraska this week, a loss to Iowa last week. Problems here?
Yeah, I've Swanigan's, they obviously have, a All-American candidate, for goodness sakes. But I'm not sold on them, to be very honest. They haven't really produced the assortment of wins that you would see from what we would think of a team that's basically been in the AP and Coaches Poll top 25 all year. They're kind of falling back to Gene Katie Purdue, like that. And I don't mean the number 1 seed with Robinson. I think they're kind of just that tournament team. They're going to wear white. They can get upset in the second round, and I don't think we're going to see much out of Purdue long term. I really don't.
And Tytel, I want to bring up one other team here. Way down in 11th place right now in the Big Ten, Minnesota. Bad week, losing 2 games, both the game to Maryland and they lost one other game, which
Ohio State.
Ohio State, thank you. They in trouble?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a bad month. Let's not sugarcoat it. They've lost 5 in a row. Granted, Wisconsin by 2 in overtime, Penn State by 2, Ohio State by 6, Maryland by 7. They're playing close against top 100 teams, if not top 50 teams. But losses are losses, and they're certainly trending down, obviously. They can't wait for the calendar to turn to February. They have a nice stretch to start. At Illinois, host Iowa, at Rutgers. They should win at least 2 of those, assuming Rutgers doesn't pull off a huge upset. And then they go back to playing the big boys like Indiana, Michigan, Maryland. They need to turn around quickly, otherwise they're going to be back in the NIT, I fear.
All right. David, the upcoming games here, anything that stands out to you?
Well, yeah, I mean, Maryland at Ohio State, I think there's going to be several bad calls and missed calls down the stretch. Maryland's going to pull that one out by 1 or 2 points. And then, like, later in the week, where is it? We've got Maryland and somebody. Oh, Purdue at Maryland. Again, I think, like, Purdue's going to hit a shot at the buzzer that's going to be waved off, and Maryland's going to pull that one out by 1 or 2 points. I see that last game you got there on Monday. Well, I mean, Nebraska really should be 8-1 in conference play. It probably at worst 7-2, but we've seen bad officiating, bad clock management, things that are just categorically unfair that have taken wins away from Nebraska and taken them from what should be a protected seeded resume down to maybe barely even getting in on the first ballot now.
I should add, this is the first of 2 matchups between Miles and Griggs. The trophy game is going to come President's Day weekend.
Okay. Just want to throw one other note out here real quick. Northwestern, amazing season so far. Cracked the top 25 poll today, number 25 in the AP poll. I don't think there's any doubt that unless the bottom falls out here, this team is getting that first NCAA tournament bid this year.
Yeah, they are going to make history this season, so it's been fun. They'll either make the NCAA for the first time ever, or they'll undergo their biggest collapse in program history. Either way, Northwestern is making history.
All right, and our colleague Kyle needs to run here, so Kyle, thanks for joining us, and we hope to have you back on again real soon.
Thanks for having me, guys. Take care.
All right.
All right, let's move on to a couple other conferences. Get through the rest of these kind of quickly here. We are starting to run late on time here. The Big 12, obviously we saw the SEC Big 12 Challenge, which, Titel, was it a shock to you that this ended up being 5-5 in the challenge between these 2 conferences, given that the Big 12 is so much higher in the power ratings, or do you think it was just a matter of the matchups kind of favoring the SEC?
Matchups. I mean, I think that the top of the Big 12 is better than the top of the SEC. I would argue the middle of the Big 12 is better than the middle of the SEC. Granted, Texas and Oklahoma are having historically terrible seasons. But, yeah, I mean, I would say that nobody goes into Rupp Arena and beats Kentucky, but obviously it's the second time it's happened in a couple months. But, yeah, I wouldn't in no way say that the SEC is even close to as good as the Big 12.
And Joby, I just noticed this actually. I did a bracket last night, in which I had Baylor as my number 1 team overall without looking at this. There's a lot of ones there on that Baylor line.
Well, and I don't know if I would have Baylor as the number 1 overall if I were doing a bracket, but I would have them on the 1 line. So I can't completely fault that. You know, Baylor's had a heck of a season. The crazy one is looking down. All right, what is Sagarin thinking that West Virginia and the BPI are 1-10? I'm sorry, that's where I go. Wait a minute. I'll predict that West Virginia doesn't walk on a neutral court and beat Kansas. Oh, wait a minute.
They pounded them. It's tough.
I'm kidding. But no, this Baylor team is the best Baylor team we've seen. But I'll tell you, if they're a 1 seed, given what Drew and company have done in the tournament, that might be your first 16-1 if they're not careful.
He's been to a couple of Elite Eights. I mean, were you at all concerned by their showing this weekend? And when I say concerned, I mean by 1 seeds.
That close, yeah. I mean, they pulled it out. I'm not a marching guy. 4 points was fine.
This is a team that Middle Tennessee blew off.
They should have trounced them. I get it. They should have, but they won at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And remember what I said last week. This was the chance, really, of Ole Miss to be able to prove themselves. And I think Ole Miss put out all the stops on it. This was the best game Ole Miss played that I've seen. I haven't seen every game Ole Miss has played, obviously. But of the games I've seen Ole Miss play, this was by far and away their best performance. I almost feel like it was okay, that's what Ole Miss can give as opposed to Baylor playing totally lackluster. Not A performance, but they didn't give a F performance either.
Well, Stalika, a team that had a rough week here in the middle is Kansas State, losing to Iowa State and then losing to Tennessee. Are we seeing Kansas State going back where I thought they should have been, and that's out of the picture, or do you think this was just a bump in the road?
I think it's going to be a little bit more than a bump on the road. I mean, they'll still be hanging around the bubble, but the team that I'm real interested in is that one of Chad's Final Four picks into the tournament, and that's Oklahoma State. I can't recall the last time, if it's ever happened even, that a team was able to start 0-6 in a major conference and still get an at-large bid. This is where I wish Kyle were still here because he's our resident historian.
I want to say Dayton started 0-5 the year they made the Elite Eight. Or maybe they were 1-5.
Just as a note, we are recording this around a little after 10 o'clock on Monday evening. Oklahoma State right now, as we record, this is in a battle with Oklahoma, at Oklahoma. Game that they really need to win, though.
Yeah.
When you start 0-6, you've got to win games like this. Matt, anything you're looking forward to as a key game coming up this week after Bedlam is over tonight?
Well,
besides the obvious one.
Well, no, besides I was going to say TCU at K-State, there's two teams who could really use a win given their week. Because even more than K-State's loss, TCU losing at home to Auburn, I think, is a tough mark for a team. I think that was kind of trending in the wrong direction to begin with, and now that's not a great loss. And I think going into the old Octagon of Doom, I kind of like K-State to get back on it. And then they come in Saturday against Texas, reeling, and where, yes, Texas has been a major disappointment. But I think they've started to play a little better lately and have the talent to knock off someone like TCU. So, like, it would stun me if TCU goes 0-2 this week. And speaking of hitting their level, I think they're starting to hit their level.
Titel, last year it was Kansas and Oklahoma twice as the huge battles. This year it's Baylor and Kansas, two potential 1 seeds. What a game coming up Wednesday night.
It's going to be unbelievable. These are arguably two of the best teams in the country, not just the conference. And the best part is it doesn't just happen once a year like Arizona, Oregon. It happens twice a year. In fact, it happens twice in 3 weeks, as Kansas will be hosting Baylor on February 18th. Excuse me, Baylor will be hosting Kansas on February 18th after they play on February 1st in Kansas. It's going to be fantastic. Going to make it must-see TV.
Yeah.
David, I'm going to pull up the Pac-12 now as we move on here. In terms of the major conferences, probably the fewest notable results here, although we got to talk a little bit about Oregon and what they did. Winning at Utah to finally get a quality road win, and then they go to Colorado.
It was bizarro. I mean, we all expected them to split that road trip, I think, or thought that they probably would. And but we expected them to do it in reverse. Utah doesn't have many home losses. In fact, I don't know off the top of my head, but it's only 1 or 2. And they were a team that I thought was trending up and improving as the season goes along, and that if they're not there yet, they would be by the end of the year. And a really nice road win for an Oregon team that didn't really have one yet. And they must have been so excited that they went out and partied and were drunk for their game at Colorado. I mean, it just made no sense.
Well, there is something that's legal in Colorado.
Yeah,
yes,
it's legal in Colorado.
And Oregon. So. Joby, the other big game during the week last week was USC knocking off UCLA. Yeah. A USC team that I think we thought was starting to fall apart. Was this the saving grace of the season here?
It stopped the bleeding. I think we cried wolf a little bit on USC because when the bubble is so weak that I don't think USC had to do a lot more to fall out. They needed to start losing to the bot. That aforementioned Colorado loss would not have been nice on USC, just as Oregon can take it. USC probably couldn't. But now that they have the UCLA win, I honestly think it might have shown a little more about UCLA than it did USC. It showed USC as a tournament team. I think we knew that. UCLA might not be a protected seed. It's right on the edge. I'm dead serious when I say this. Right now, they probably still are. But boy, they are a Stanford loss or whatever away. Yeah, looking at it, they're a loss at Washington this week away. From losing that category.
Yeah, Sleeka, you had a comment about them?
Joby talks about separation between the 11 potential ACC teams and the bottom of the league cooperating. I mean, there is clear separation in the Pac-12 between the top half and the bottom half, but Colorado has already shown they can play spoiler once, and depending on how well they do in their road trip to Northern California and a couple winnable games at home against the Washington schools, it wouldn't surprise me to see them suddenly creep up to possibly 5 wins and get up to 5 and 8 in a couple weeks.
And let me add one more thing, if you let me, Chad. It's weird that you see, usually it's a Thursday, Saturday, like when you look at the schedules we have up there, usually like you see Arizona, at Oregon State, at Oregon. That's normal. With the Wednesday schedule that UCLA and USC, for that matter, are facing, that means they're not flying up and getting used to the area. They're flying all the way from LA up to Pullman, then back down to LA, then back up to Seattle. It's a little bit of a travel pain in the ass, and that could have an impact. We'll see, but it really could have an impact. Not being Thursday, Saturday, but Wednesday, Saturday.
Well, Ty, let me hear this, because I actually heard a comment that some of these Pac-12 schools are wanting to get away from this travel partner deal, especially because the conference wants to do these Wednesday games to get more games on TV. And when you look at this upcoming schedule, you got the exact problem that Joby mentioned. Do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, it's not a problem. The Ivy League plays back-to-back, and I understand it's all clustered in the Northeast and it's a little different, but these guys are not like getting on a bus and driving 12 hours and eating like at Denny's 3 times a day. Like, don't cry for them, Argentina. I'm not worried about the Arizona road trip because of the travel. I'm worried that the Ducks at home are unfreaking believable. Thank God we get the host against Oregon State on Thursday before heading up there on Saturday.
Right, and that is obviously the game, probably the second biggest game this week after Baylor, Kansas, that huge Arizona-Oregon game.
Right, and before it expanded out to 12, it was in a 10-team format, and it was a Thursday, Saturday travel partner format for years. So, I don't know. This is just the result of TV. Chad, can we take or was there more?
I was just going to ask you, I was just going to comment that there's another big game on Thursday is Utah and Cal, the two published teams in the conference. But you had another comment there, David?
Oh, yeah. Well, Utah, and that's a big one because, I mean, those are two teams that need to come into that with a sense of urgency. But can we just take a minute to admire what Oregon State is doing? For a power conference team, just based on the teams that they regularly play, to be 296 in the RPI is quite an accomplishment. And their strength of resume is 331. There's only 351 teams out there. So they're in the bottom 25. And it's not that they're bad. It's that they're this bad and in a power conference, and they wore white in the NCAA tournament last year. That's astounding.
And they actually gave Colorado a bit of a challenge last week before losing, and then Colorado turns around and beats Oregon, and go figure. Let's where are we next? I think we're over to the SEC next, and we already discussed the SEC Big 12 Challenge. You see Kentucky, South Carolina, and Florida up there. But, Tytel, I want to ask you this question here, and that's on Tennessee. Had a real nice week, top of the Kentucky win, then beating Kansas State in the Challenge. Is this a team that you're going to start looking at now for your potential tournament bid?
I mean, 9 losses is a lot. Especially considering just a couple weeks ago they were 9-9 with their best SEC win, I would say at Texas A&M, who's probably not going to make the tourney. That being said, when you're beating Kentucky anywhere, home or away, even by 2 points, it definitely puts you on the radar. But I think they're going to need to do a lot more. The next 4 are winnable before they rematch Kentucky on Valentine's Day at Rupp Arena. Boy, I think Kentucky's going to be ready for that one. So if they're like 16-9 at that point and lose a close one to be 16-10, then they have a couple easy ones, South Carolina, and then a couple easy ones. Like, there are 20 wins on the schedule. but it is going to take a lot of work. Thank God for them. The SEC is the SEC.
Well, they're 12-9, and their RPI is healthy despite only being 3 games over 500. If they go out to 16-9, it's not like going from 20-2 to 24-2. This is like a big jump in their overall winning percentage, and their next 4 games are winnable. If they win the next 4, and they're probably going to be favored to win in all 4 of them, they're going to have all the earmarks of a team that's inside the bubble, wouldn't you say? Not the royal you, the collective you, the panel.
Well, and you look at that strength of schedule, number 4 in the nation. That's a very good number.
It'll go down after the next 4 games. Look who they're playing.
Well, they play Missouri, yeah. So.
No, I was just going to say we're seeing a similar narrative playing out with Michigan State, and they'll get the sympathy of the media saying, well, look at the schedule they're playing, but look at the Vols here. It's number 4, and unlike Ohio State, they actually are not afraid to play a couple in-state opponents in Chattanooga and East Tennessee State, and they actually won the East Tennessee State game on the road, which is suddenly looking pretty pivotal for the Vols.
Tennessee's resume looks a lot like Georgetown's. There's a lot of similarities, and like Georgetown, they've got to get above that 2 games above 500, 3 games above 500 level. If they get distance on their overall record of 5 to 6 games at the end of the year, I think you're going to find them in.
I think they're going to be 4 games over the 500 level after their next.
Then they play South Carolina and Kentucky. Yeah. I'm just saying. They, at the end of the year, when we are evaluating, if they're 5 to 6 games over 500 at that point, I think we'll see a resume and we'll see a strength of schedule. We'll see the big wins already. We'll see enough to say, yeah, you should be in over one of the Big 12, name your team.
Matt, the upcoming games here, obviously the huge one on Saturday, Kentucky at Florida. Is Kentucky be losing another game here, making 3 out of 4 even if they beat Georgia this week?
I actually think they match up pretty well with Florida, and that I think Florida, their pressure defense, I think Fox will go through it. And this is one I like Florida as a team, but I think this might just be a poor matchup for them. And I think Kentucky gets back on track this week with 2 of the better SEC teams in Georgia and Florida. I think they get wins in both to get back on track for them to try to salvage a 2 seed.
All right. Let's run through the remaining conferences really quickly here. Stalika, the American Conference. I know you're a huge Cincinnati fan. They had a pretty nice week. Is this just a 2-team league? Is there anybody else that you're still looking at here?
Let's never confuse being a fan with being happy with what they've been able to accomplish this year.
I was not serious in saying that. You understand?
But at the same time, I think we have to also be impressed with what SMU has done, because they're the only team in the American that's been able to give the Bearcats a real close game. And another team, sadly, that does not seem to be going away, and that is Frank Haith's Tulsa team. Still hanging around at 6-2, even with a loss to East Carolina midweek.
All right, Salika, we started this show by talking about metrics. Every single one of them is a triple digit.
No, not Tulsa.
Not adjusted defense and luck.
Okay, not the luck rating. The metric.
There's their coach. That's the most unlucky thing that could possibly happen.
And full disclosure, I just looked it up. They're 108 in mine. They're 108.
Joby, the Atlantic 10 here. I think we all looking at this Dane team as being the best team in the conference. They did lose the game at VCU. Is VCU back in the picture now?
Yes. And Matt was so accurate. He had a good joking comment a few weeks ago. He was so accurate when he said VCU can't see it, has to look at the field from binoculars. I think now, because they aren't losing the bad losses and they got that key win against Dayton, the key to VCU, more so than for Dayton, is if VCU wins outright the regular season title in the Atlantic 10, which is within reach. They've already gotten their at-Richmond loss out of the way. If VCU were to do that, I think they are inside they're in that play-in game sort of area, but they're inside the bubble at that point.
Right. And David, VCU is actually hosting Richmond this week. Then at St. Bonaventure, a huge game. But I really want to ask you about the huge non-conference battle we've got coming up on Saturday. How excited are you?
I am excited. I plan on going to St. Louis for that game.
North Carolina A&T, a centenary award contender.
Yes. The A-10, I would just like to point out, I mean, it's not Mountain West level yet, but there are 14 teams in this conference, and 10 of them are 101 or worse in the RPI, if I counted right.
Matt, you had a comment about the conference?
Yeah, I am not quite ready to be Barry, Rhode Island just yet here. I know they're only at 5-3 now, but man, I feel like the talent is there. They're starting to play a little better this week. GW at home, but then at Davidson Friday. You get those two. You still have a return game against Dayton at home. And then I don't think they've had their VCU matchup yet. I can still see Rhode Island making a place to win this.
I'll pull up their schedule. They did lose to Richmond this week, which did not help at all for the Rams. Their game against VCU, I don't even see it here. Oh, there it is. It's coming up February 25th. It's a home game. And they've got Dayton at home as well on February 10th. So they do have their chances, and they're at home as well. Last but not least, John T., let's pull up the West Coast Conference here. Do we have the potential trap game coming up Thursday nights? That's the big question here with the Zags at BYU.
We do not. I think in years past we might have, because BYU is so great at home and Gonzaga has shown they're not perfect, but those two things are not existing anymore. Gonzaga is perfect. BYU is not the team they were in the past. Tyler Haws isn't coming out with his 2,500 career points. His younger brother, TJ Haws, is. He's not the same kind of player. I love Eric Mika. And if Gonzaga did not have a big man at all, I think that there might be some concern. Tarnowski can hold his own against Mika. I don't think the Gonzaga's going to win by 20, but I like their chances a lot. I think they're going to go unbeaten in the regular season.
I think Gonzaga is going to win by 20.
David, do you really? I mean, BYU is a tough place to win, and how pumped is this BYU crowd going to be hosting the number one team in the nation in their first game as number one?
They're going to be psyched, and I really hope they enjoy it until the under-12 timeout.
Okay, Matt, you wanted to comment on them too?
I will say, I think Gonzaga's going to win, but if this is a close game, they haven't played one of those for a little while, and that sometimes when you've been winning these games by 20 and 30 could be a shock to the system. So if it's close, say under 10 with 10 to go, that's the one way it might break for BYU.
Well, I don't know. I'm going to pull the screen down here, and I want to run through each of you for any other final comments or thoughts. And Matt, I'm with you. Why don't we start with you?
Well, as I say, just as I'm giving you BYU hope there, I wonder, is it toward the end of the road for Dave Rose here at BYU? That this year's team has way too much talent to be sitting where they are, where their tournament hopes are buried short of a WCC tourney win, and are probably out of the NIT if it started today. And that's it. You have Eric Mika, who's probably an NBA big guy. You have the top 50 guard backcourt with the Haws and Embry little brothers who haven't played up to par, and then a bunch of other guys who had high major offers, and just it hasn't hit. And given that he flirted with jobs in the past, I wonder, does the BYU administration remember that and think, oh, sorry, now that things aren't going so hot, we're not so loyal to you either, and could we have a fairly significant opening here on the West Coast come March?
All right, Joby.
And as we look up, Oklahoma State has started to put a little spread on Oklahoma, and that leads to my point. What a mess around the bubble the Big 12 is creating. Five bubble teams. I mean, that is a lot for a team that actually doesn't have 12, but only 10 members. And it's going to be really interesting. I thought by now we'd start to see some things sorting out when we were talking about, the Texas schools, TCU, Texas Tech, with K-State floating around. No, Oklahoma State goes out and they beat Arkansas, and now they're in the discussion. They've made it from 3 to 4 to now 5. What's going to happen next? I mean, are we going to actually see Oklahoma or Texas go on a run or something? It's going to be very interesting to see how the committee breaks down these teams if they continue to circle around and do it's not a circling firing squad, as John Stalika said. It's a circling, they're each handing each other life rafts, but there's only 3. Yeah, or so. It'll be interesting to see which three have chairs, to use the term, when the music stops.
Salika, he called you out. Let me go to you next.
I'm glad that Kyle Lamb brought up the post-game press conference theater that Lee Del Vecchio used to run here. It's a shame that the FCC wouldn't let him bring up Barry Hinson from Southern Illinois' legendary rant a few years back.
Matt, did you have another comment before I go to?
Yes, to continue on Joby's point,
Yeah.
I know this is a little unparalleled in balanced round-robin leagues. I think Oklahoma State could jump teams and finish a game or two behind because they had such a good non-conference run. Then you just add Arkansas on top and say that Wichita State, Georgetown wins in a good run. So I think Oklahoma State might jump teams ahead of them in the final standings.
Well, they better win this game because they just kind of started to let Oklahoma back into it. But Tytel, let me go to you next.
I want to give a little coaching credit here this week. So on Sunday, lost amongst the Villanova, Virginia, Pippen, and the Arizona. Oh, my God, they're going to lose to Washington. Thank God they didn't win. We had a little game involving a couple of Big Ten teams. And Purdue has this guy, Caleb Swanigan, who's a walking double-double and looking more and more like a lottery pick. And the opponent's coach says, I don't know what we're going to do to stop him. He's so great. Let's try to put in our 6'11" freshman center from Canada, Jordy Tishimanga, his first ever career start. Granted, the kid fouled out in 19 minutes. But he held Caleb Swanigan, who's looking like an All-American, a 5 of 15 shooting from the field. The coach who made that great coaching call to give his team a 3-point win over Purdue, Tim Miles.
Yes.
David.
Yes. Well, it can't be a final thought because I just mentioned how Nebraska is being systematically screwed by the Big Ten. But I want to thank Tytel for bringing that up again. I think Virginia is going to get a 1 seed and win the ACC. And it seems like in the past they've started off good and ended up great. They just continue to improve as the season goes along. We've seen them drop games in the out-of-conference portion of the season, and I think we saw that again, but we've also seen them finish strong. We've seen them go for the double. The last 3 years, they've landed on the 2-line or better. I think they're heading back there again, and they may end up on the 1-line. And I know the jury is still out on it, but I'm starting to think Tony Bennett's pretty good.
Okay, Tony Bennett's pretty good. I want to end the show actually by mentioning a game that's coming up tomorrow night at 9 o'clock on ESPN. Georgia will be at Kentucky. The reason for mentioning it is that this will be the last game in a very long and very storied broadcasting career for Brent Musburger, and who has always kind of towed the line in discussing certain margins of victory, especially more so in football than in basketball. Interestingly enough, from what I've understood, is he's already begun moving on to his next career, where he's going to be going to Vegas, and behind the scenes of running a company there that takes wagering on sports. So, but we do want to wish Brent Musburger the best of luck in his next career, and he has been a voice on ESPN and in the SEC for my entire life. So it will be different not having him there on the call games.
Yes, I've always enjoyed having him as a colleague.
Yes. We're going to have to make him a panelist here. Well, David, you have to get to work on that. But on behalf of David Griggs, Matt Zakowski, and down below, John Slika, Joby Fortson, and John Tytel, and Kyle Lamb, who had to leave early tonight, we want to thank everyone for joining us, and we'll talk to you again real soon.